Hey, I'm Ben Avery, and in this episode of Is It Worth Reading, I'm going to be talking about the graphic novel Samson the Nazirite. Hey there, I'm Ben Avery, and this is Strangers and Aliens, which is an audio and video podcast feed, video feed, where we explore the connection between science fiction and spirituality, between fantasy and faith, between imagination and Christianity. And the graphic novel I'm about to talk about today is something that it combines all of them all together. I mean, this is it's called Samson the Nazirite. It is the story of Samson from the Book of Judges, and it is an imaginative retelling of his story, of Samson's story. And like I said, it just kind of encapsulates all of that. The one difference being, when you're talking about Bible stories, you're not talking about fantasy and science fiction. It's more of a historical fiction. And historical fiction, I feel like, does fit into the speculative fiction spectrum in a sense, because it is, to me anyway, there's a lot of similarities between fantasy and historical fiction because both of them are creating a new world for you to step into. The difference being, in fantasy, it's a world that never existed and never will, and with historical fiction, it is a world that has existed in the past. And the idea of stepping into historical fiction is to allow yourself to experience what it may have been like when things happen. It's never going to be an exact one-to-one, this is exactly what it was like. That's just never going to happen. But it is a unique way of, it's a unique form of storytelling that has its own skill set that needs to be developed in order to do it well. And one of the parts of the skill set is research, and one of them is to be able to step into yourself as a writer into that place and time, put yourself into the shoes or sandals of someone who existed in that place and time. And I always feel when I'm working on a project that has to do with just any kind of historical reality, there is a responsibility to translate it well. And you want to present emotional truth, but you also want to present historical truth. And you want to do it in such a way that you have a narrative truth that you're able to follow as a reader. And so that's something that Samson the Nazirite, I feel like, does well. Now, Samson the Nazirite was created by a writer named Luis Serrano. And he created this. He's someone that I've been watching this as this project has come to fruition. And it was really great when I was able to finally open the envelope that came to my doorstep and find this book inside. Finally, it's all collected. It's done. It's in full color. And I was very excited to get it because, like I said, I've been watching this as he's been working on it. This is something that I met him. I had him come on over the podcast because there was a thing called the Gideon Film. Boy, I'm going to butcher the title of the place, but it's a Gideon Film Festival basically, and we did a comic book contest, and he was a part of that comic book contest where he scripted something, and it was about Gideon. And so I was able to meet him through that, and then we've kind of stayed in contact over the years. And when he finally contacted me and said this was ready, and he asked me, did I want to see a copy? I'm like, of course I want to see a copy. And so I finally got it in my hands, and I know that he sent it to me because he was looking for a blurb, and I did send him a blurb because, I really did like this. And in fact, let me go ahead and read what I wrote about Samson the Nazirite from my blurb. Here's what I wrote. A fantastic work of biblical fiction, Luis Serrano's Samson beautifully adapts the action and heart of the biblical story with gorgeous, energetic artwork and a script that delves deep into this complex and captivating man from Scripture. Actually, I guess I don't need to say anything else for the video, do I? Because I kind of said everything right there. But it is. I mean, all those things that I said are things that I really felt when I read it, after I had read it. He really did do a good job of creating that historical fiction portal that you're able to step through and able to kind of experience what life was like. Now, I've done some research into the Samson story because I want to do my own version of Samson that's nothing like this. sideways retelling, not a sideways in the sense of the biblical truth and the biblical events, but sideways in the sense of narrative point of view that you may not usually think of following when you're following the story of Samson. The narrative point of view for this is just following the story of Samson, and it's got all of his family members, and it brings into all these different relationships, and it brings in the whole idea of what's going on with the Philistines, and he does a good job of creating an historical backdrop that is interesting and as accurate as possible. There is not a lot of information that I've been able to find so far about that particular period of time in biblical history. And so there are some things that you do have to kind of create in order to build a narrative structure that is going to be satisfying for a modern audience who is used to modern storytelling. Because you have to remember, when you're reading the Bible's narrative structure is the narrative structure of a whole nother culture, almost a whole nother world. And so the way that they were structuring the narrative, they weren't sitting down and saying, what is the best way to create a 3-act narrative that follows this chronological order. Now, there is a chronological order that gets followed in the biblical accounts, but there's also a thematic structure that goes along with that. And so sometimes things are taken out of order and done in such a way that you're following these kind of thematic, emotional, or intellectual theming instead of just the event. Now, Samson is pretty much event when you're looking at the account in Judges, but it's not a 3-act structure. And so what you have to do as a biblical storyteller is you have to kind of take a look at the events, build the events out, and then also, especially when you're doing anything of length like this, you have to put in some extra things that allow you to build the world and allow people to understand what the world was like at the time. And so there's a lot that goes into a work like this, and it succeeds. I really feel like this is a successful account of the Samson story. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this is the art style that gets used in this. Now, it is a very clean art style. It's a very modern art style. It's a very American art style as well. And it's definitely, following along that American comic book art style. But what I love about this is that it is not, as you can see right here, if you're looking at the cover, it's not a big, bulky Hercules, Incredible Hulk, or even Superman. This is a lean, strong man who is supernaturally strong. And it actually kind of takes the idea that I've talked about in the past, where you take a look at Henry Cavill, even Christopher Reeve. These are men who built up the muscle mass so they could be Superman and they could look super strong, super tough. And then people complain because Wonder Woman didn't have that beefy muscle mass that maybe she should have if she was going to be as strong as she is. Until you consider Wonder Woman is a mythological origin and it's magical, and so for her to have like this supernatural, superhuman strength, she doesn't necessarily need the physiology of a regular human that a regular human would have to have in order to have that same strength level. And so that's what you have here, is you have this guy, he's strong, he's healthy, but he's not beefy. He is not a bodybuilder. And I really appreciate that about the artwork style that was chosen for this. So there was a lot of work that went into this on Lewis's end, and then he brought in these artists to work on these different issues. This is violent. This is muscular. This is Conan-esque in some ways, the style of violence and action that's happening here. But it's violence and action that carries consequences with it. And the other thing, going back to my little blurb that I did, I said the script delves deep into this complex and captivating man from Scripture. Samson is a complex and captivating man to me. The thing about Samson in Scripture is he's not someone to be emulated necessarily, especially not early on. I don't feel like the things he was doing when he was showing off his strength, or when he was being dishonest with Delilah, I don't feel like those are things that the scripture is endorsing. They are events that the scripture is reporting. And there's a difference between endorsement and reporting. And the difference is, here's a story as it happened. What can you learn from that? Maybe the lesson is don't do that. Okay. If Samson had just done a couple things differently, things would not have gone for him the way that it did. If he had just kept his eye on God and kept his eye, that's a bad example to use. Although, if he had kept his eye on God, maybe he wouldn't have lost his eye. But anyway, her eyes. Anyway, uh, he's not someone to emulate in some of his early actions. Now, he did keep his hair and he did keep his vows, and so he was able to keep his strength, and so there is that. But then he also did some things that were not I don't think God really was very pleased with him about. And one of those things was just allowing himself to be tricked by Delilah, and he would have very simply been able to sidestep that if he hadn't lied to her. If he had just said no, 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 and kept saying no, 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 would have gone a lot better for him. But instead, he lied to her. And in doing that, he actually gave her, I think, a little bit of an opening. And because he lied, and then she did what he said. And then he lied again, and she did what he said again. And for some reason, when he told her the truth, I don't know why he didn't think that she was going to repeat that. And it's possible that when he told her the truth, maybe he didn't quite believe it himself. I don't know. That's me projecting onto the story, and that's not something that I would ever add into the story or ever teach about. But there are things that I would wonder about and talk about in conversation, where I wonder if this would have happened, if this had happened, would that have happened, that kind of a thing. But the thing about Samson, and it's a really cool scene in the graphic novel, and that is that final moment where he relies on God. And that's in some ways, now I heard this, I'm not sure if this is true, but I've heard that some Jewish scholarship looks at the word Gibberum, which it means a hero who has relied on God, and that he is not referred to as a Gibberum until that moment at the end where he totally relies on God, gets his strength back even though he had his hair cut, and is able to bring down the house on the Philistines. And I love that idea that he really wasn't a hero. I mean, you can take that potential Hebrew teaching that I never actually saw a primary source about, let's put it that way. You could take that or leave that. But the truth is, he finally, at the end, where he was at the depths of everything, and don't get me wrong, he was really at the end then, because what he did ended up killing him as well. But that's where he said, I'm going to trust in you. I'm going to rely on you. Would you? And he actually asks God. I feel like he's humbled himself. He's been humiliated. And they've taken his eyes, they've taken his hair, and they've put him, to work or whatever. But he's been humiliated, but now he's humble. When he talks to God and speaks to God, and when he does have his strength restored, it comes after he's humbled himself before the Lord. And so, yeah. The character of Samson is a very complex and interesting character, and he's a character that I think would be hard to do well. But guess what? Lewis nails it. He does. He nails it. He does it well. So if you're interested in getting this, you can go to SAMSONstory.com. And if you go to SAMSONstory.com, that will be a place to order this graphic novel directly from the creator. And I recommend it. I really do. Is it worth reading? Yes. Resoundingly so. So I do want to thank you for spending time with me here on our YouTube channel and for talking with me about geeky stuff like comic books and biblical history. And until next time, I just want to say, please hit like, please hit subscribe. And even if you don't hit like or subscribe, I do want to wish you, but I especially want to wish you, if you did hit like and subscribe, Godspeed.